Think about search. Traditionally, I would have gone into Google, typed a search URL, and then seen a series of links, ranked, boosted, sponsored, or otherwise, and I would engage in that content. Today, most of us look just at the AI synthesized search results, the AI powered result. And that's actually reducing our visitation to the end publisher sites who produce some of that content that ultimately rolls up into the AI results itself. The channels by which an advertiser or marketer can actually reach that consumer and influence them to engage with their services, their products, their content is starting to shift. We've got to both rely on that traditional mix of search, of social, of direct publisher, or larger relationships through programmatic scale. And now we've got to start to influence the AI at the point of reasoning or synthesis of response. The sooner you develop that practice, the earlier that you'll be able to achieve those outcomes and benefit from the AI that exists even in the current state. You'll also be ready as the new era, as we see some of that nebulosity start to take greater shape. You'll be ready to engage in those agentic related channels. You'll be able to engage in new formats, all through getting your data strategy and foundations right today, and then developing your practices. So get going. The winners of tomorrow are actually developing today.
Welcome to the OnBase Podcast. I'm Gabe Rogol, CEO of Demandbase, and I am here to host a very important episode of the podcast because we're going to focus on the future of advertising and the impact AI is having on it. And it's important because, in my opinion, digital advertising is going to be disrupted more than it ever has in the next few years. And we know digital advertising is almost constantly being disrupted. But really, LLMs, Gen AI, we all know how much it's changing the way we work, but it's really calling some fundamental things into question in the ad world. Notably, what does context mean? How are audiences discovered? Does SEO and SEM even matter? And these are things that we've all relied on to drive traffic to our websites. And so there are a lot of questions to answer. And that's really going to be the focus of the podcast today. Future of advertising. We're also going to hit on AI use cases that are making an impact now. There's a lot of hype, but what's working right now? And the importance of the data strategy, because really data is at the center of all of this. And as my guest, I am very honored and excited to have Craig Miller, who is the Global Industry and Solutions Lead for Advertising and Marketing at AWS. He's got decades of experience from building the first third-party ad server to leading innovation at amazing companies, innovative companies, AppNexus, Xandr, and now AWS. He really brings, I think, what's going to be a valuable perspective on how data, AI, and marketing technology are converging to shape the next chapter of digital advertising to help us answer, or at least put us in the right direction. Some really big questions going on. Welcome, Craig. It's great to have you.
Thanks for having me, Gabe. Super excited to be here and excited to talk about the topic of the future of advertising and how it's going to transform with AI. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it. I guess a good place to start, we talked about your amazing career and all that you've seen, digital advertising, man, as it evolved in the last 20 or 25 years, and you've had a front row seat. Looking back at it and everything you've seen, what are some of the lessons that you've learned through the past transformations? And how do you see that carrying into, the AI world that we're moving into?
Gabe, it's been a really exciting evolution to watch in advertising and marketing over the course of my career. Given that we've seen such a rapid pace of innovation during that time, starting from really direct, I would say, publisher advertising into ad networks, onto programmatic advertising, social search, and now this period, I think, of this new chapter of ultimately AI. One of the lessons that I think I've really learned in watching that evolution is that ultimately the age-old goals of marketers and advertisers truly remain the same. We actually have to influence customers to engage with products and services, right? The techniques and sophistication by which we achieve those goals has really grown exponentially over that period. Our ability to reach those consumers, to manage data at scale, to effectively decision through initially machine learning and now through AI to use that data to empower intelligent outcomes in acquiring, retaining, upselling, and ultimately satisfying or supporting those customers has been ongoing in this constant evolution. But those goals really have not changed. And so when I look at sort of the AI-driven era and the opportunities that it presents to ultimately achieve those goals more efficiently, using new formats and ultimately an increasing number of channels like agents, I still think that some of those lessons of sticking to the age-old goals and powering outcomes that matter to advertisers and marketers alike, that the solutions that offer meaningful outcomes will be the winning solutions in supporting those needs. So I would say stick to the age-old goals, apply the latest in technology and innovation to produce those outcomes in more meaningful and more efficient ways, but don't lose sight of the goals.
Yeah, keep your eye on the ball, with all the crazy bells and whistles and hype out there. And I think that's really valuable advice to focus on outcomes. And, I'm pretty hopeful, although so much is still to be worked out, that the innovation is going to enable marketers to achieve outcomes much more directly and efficiently than they ever have. And I think that's really the upside. And the excitement is just kind of figuring out how do we get there. And I guess we get there by starting where we are now. And, I know you're working with so many marketers around using AI today to make a difference. We also know that there's a lot of hype, and we're probably in the hype cycle. What do you see the best marketers are doing? What are the specific use cases that are making an impact and driving outcomes today?
Hey, look, advertisers and marketers are using AI effectively today, right? And really, I think I look at it as kind of an evolution on top of the way they've done things to date. So, when we think about innovation, I don't want to call it hype. We'll look at AI in its next chapter and really at the forefront of the pioneering in this AI chapter. I think it's more than hype. It's actually unsettled. The shape of the future isn't totally determined, but what we ultimately know is it will diversify and enrich. But let's look at today, to your point, right? I think advertising and marketing, customers today are leveraging AI to increase the operational efficiencies around the advertising and marketing that they're doing currently. And they're doing that through, empowering ultimately better outcomes through personalization techniques, through better segmentation and targeting, through better enrichment of data and the ability to integrate, ingest, and then make use of or activate that data within the advertising and marketing channels that they'll reach consumers in the current world. And when they start to look to the next chapter, they'll have an increasing number of channels by which to engage those consumers. So the hype, if there is any, and I'm not going to call it that, is really around this next chapter, right? Of having agents ultimately help make some of the decisions on behalf of consumers and ultimately synthesize data to put that in front of them to help with the decisioning in the discovery of those products and services. So part of the challenge is really how does that data become actionable at the point of reasoning where the consumer and the agent acting on behalf of the consumer will actually discover those products and services. So today, great usage of AI and personalization, really enhancing and improving the efficiencies around the current state of the art of advertising. And the great new frontier is much greater automation on behalf of the consumer itself in making those decisionings and in discovering, the products and services. Hopefully that resonates, Gabe.
Yeah, it does. No, and I think the distinction between, hype and unsettled is a good one, because I think we all know that there's a there. It's
Yeah.
just, where are you seeing the tangible outcomes, and where are we still determining how to get them? And I think what you're saying is, in the current state, we're seeing a lot of great success with efficiencies around personalization, which is a powerful way to achieve that age-old goal of advertising, to engage your audience, enriching of data, the segmentation, getting to the recommendations on what channel to use. So that whole flow of activating the data to the right audience, to the right channel, and personalizing. We're seeing a lot of great AI use cases where teams are getting much more efficient. Um, where do you see teams getting held back, right? Because I think with our customer base, I see the same thing. There's a lot of our marketer partners that are making their processes so much more efficient than they were before AI, and others are struggling more. What do you think some of the key blockers are that teams can overcome to get to see those benefits that kind of best in class are currently seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I think, Gabe, we see a couple of different classes of what I'm going to consider to be stumbling block, right? One is really about data itself and being able to have the right data to ultimately power the reasoning or decisioning that AI ultimately, wants to enable on behalf of the advertiser or marketer. And so, overcoming that challenge is difficult for some organizations. Some really have a deep understanding of a consumer or their targeted audience and profiles, and they own that directly. And or they may work with an integrated stack that can really help them, achieve that goal of unifying the data, enriching the data in order to make it AI ready, right? That's one form of stumbling block. It's not that every organization has that readiness today. And I think, there's great ways to overcome it. We could talk about some of that later, right? Um, Other stumbling blocks are really what I'm going to call organizational readiness, right? Is there the knowledge and experience or governance in place to really enable the use of that data and AI itself? And not every organization has really invested deeply in that knowledge and experience and developed ultimately the musculature around their organization to really thrive in an AI related. There's ways to overcome that. We can also talk about that in a little bit here. But I do think that, that organizational readiness is an important concern. In certain industries, we actually see also impediments to the use of some of the personalization techniques, maybe due to like SAG-AFTRA and other, type, regulations or agreements that ultimately may limit the use of personalization or content, right? Or even data, related to that. And so there are regulated industries and industries where agreements may, in fact, decelerate the adoption of AI by those customers who could actually benefit. And it's worth exploring, how to overcome those challenges to ultimately, adopt AI. Control of brand voice and style is another concern that we often hear when customers are contemplating the use of AI for, generation of content, for example, for personalization or optimization related purposes, right? That fear of loss of control of what it means to maintain brand style and voice. And so, those are a couple of those concerns. But when it comes down to driving adoption, I do think that proving the results in ways that show that there's an optimization and a return on investment, again, producing those outcomes, Gabe, that's where, customers really need to lean in. And that starts to make the value of overcoming those stumbling blocks and reducing the impediments worth attaining.
Really good stuff. Yeah. So, I mean, kind of the different layers of blockers. You've got the data layer, if we don't, which we will talk a lot more about, but if you don't have access to data, and then the right data and kind of clean data, then the results aren't going to be there. Then your org's readiness to actually use it and operate off of it. Some areas where personalization maybe isn't as much as of an option, so they're not seeing as much of a benefit. Couple follow-up questions on this, on your last 2 points. On the control of brand voice, I think what you're saying there is some companies, some marketers are more willing to kind of hand over creative, maybe even some brand type creatives to AI. What are you seeing in terms of like the cutting edge of that? Are brands like, hey, create an ad for me completely from AI, create a homepage completely from AI, or is it something less than that? Or like, I'm really interested in that because there are a lot of products that you see and companies out there that you're starting to kind of create whole campaigns from scratch using AI, and the range of comfort zone there is really interesting to monitor. So what are you seeing there?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to segment or really tier the market slightly, right? And I think, if we look to the large enterprise brands who have really valued their style and voice in market and may work with an agency, there they may have a little less direct tolerance to turn over the keys completely to AI, even if their agency or in-house marketing teams are benefiting from creative generation and creative content, coming out of the AI itself, right? They don't necessarily want to turn it over to the machine directly. When we start to look at the mid-sized market, right? There's a much greater historic impediment or barrier to the economics of content production that may limit their ability to ultimately engage in advertising and marketing or personalization techniques. And so working with, integrated stacks, partners, vendors, or platforms that can offer turnkey solutions to help them with creative generation really speeds their time to market and overcomes their inability traditionally to produce valuable content to put in front of the consumer. And now they can actually engage with those platforms that have AI creative generation to originate their campaign and get going even more quickly. And so, those are kind of two tiers of the market I would look at. The other one, segmentation, would really come around. Is this a regulated industry? Do I have the right to use data and personalize? Healthcare, it's maybe a little more limited than, say, retail, right? Or other lighter weight consumer publishing segments. Hopefully that helps, Gabe.
Yeah, no, it's super helpful. And I think your point around, mid-sized companies or companies that haven't had the resources to produce the content around personalization is a really important one, because at Demandbase, we've worked on personalization with companies for a long, long time. And historically, the problem with the hope of personalization and the benefit of personalization is clear. The reality of it and all the content that you need to actually do the personalization has been what's tough historically. And now we're at this moment with AI where we can overcome that hurdle. And so to your point about outcomes, probably around engagement, and because you have more content to personalize, there's really going to be some upside over the next couple of years for companies that haven't been able to personalize in the past. And enterprise have, because they have the content machine, but to your point, other companies haven't, and what an opportunity. One more follow-up question. You mentioned kind of wrapping all these blockers in the point around, it goes back to driving outcomes, which I 100% agree with. Is there any outcomes, if you're going through, these different use cases that you've mentioned around personalization and enrichment, et cetera, are there outcomes that companies should focus on that makes clear, internally for the stakeholders that they're moving in the right direction?
Yeah, I mean, again, to hark back to those age-old goals,
Yeah.
right? Pick one of those. Am I looking to acquire new customers? Am I looking to retain the customers that I currently have? Am I looking to upsell them, right? Or even support them better through customized, customer experience channels, contact center and support, right? across all of those, AI is enhancing and improving the outcomes. Which ones matter, I think, really depends on the organization that's engaging in the marketing, the advertising, or the customer experience, right? And they really should look at prioritizing the use case that matters to them and ultimately valuing that outcome differently for each of those stages and lean into a prioritized sort of roadmap that actually enhances their ability to achieve one of those goals. I hope that answers your question, Gabe.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Prioritize, kind of look at your overall go to market, prioritize, look at the traditional metrics you've been tracking, kind of do a stack rank prioritization and kind of knock it down with AI as you go and make sure you're moving in the right direction. It's really good advice.
Yeah, and like we mentioned earlier, make sure you have the right data in place,
Yeah,
right? And that the data is accessible to achieve the enhancement to the outcome for the prioritized valued use case.
absolutely. All right. I've been looking forward to this question, and it's a big one around LLMs. And so I think this is on everybody's mind as we see the impact on search or the potential impact on search that various LLMs are having. Because as we're all changing, I'm changing the way I find content. Clearly, that's going to change the nature of ad channels. Probably in a mild way in the short and midterm, and perhaps in a more pronounced way in the long term. I know nobody has the single answer on this, but what do you think this means for marketers and how they find audiences and how they're going to advertise as habits change in the way you find content because of LLMs?
Yeah. I mean, I think each and every one of us as consumers is already enabling this change, and we're seeing glimmers of it. Uh, think about search, right? Traditionally, I would have gone into Google, typed a search URL, and then seen a series of links, ranked, boosted, sponsored, or otherwise, and I would engage in that content. Today, most of us look just at the AI synthesized search results, the AI powered results. And that's actually reducing our visitation to the end publisher sites who produce some of that content that ultimately rolls up into the AI results itself. So with AI starting to synthesize those results, the channels by which an advertiser or marketer can actually reach that consumer and influence them to engage with their services, their products, their content is starting to shift, right? We've got to both rely on that traditional mix of search, of social, of direct publisher, or larger relationships through programmatic at scale. And now we've got to start to influence the AI at the point of reasoning or synthesis of of response, right? And so the question starts to become, right, as a marketer, how do I ensure that the data that I want to influence the reasoning is available to the AI models at the point of decision that'll then influence the consumer itself? And or if it's the agent making a decision on behalf of the consumer, how do I ensure that my data is accessible to that agent to have it make the right decision that I wanted to influence as the marketer or advertiser, right? So the in channels by which I think the marketer advertiser will need to reach that consumer will both remain consistent with the traditional channels and now be decorated or augmented with this additional channel of the agent itself and AI. And so reaching that AI, getting my data and influence into the reasoning model becomes the next challenge for the marketer.
Yeah, and that's well said, and an incredibly big change in terms of how we think about context, right? So to summarize, the traditional channels are not going away. Publisher channel, search, etc. They are not likely, and I'm putting words in your mouth, likely not growing, but will need to be augmented. And I think the key insight is the context there is the point of reasoning. So where marketers are going to have to think about how do we influence at the point of reasoning, which sounds like is really the agents, buying and selling agents, publisher agents, and the synthesis of AI in kind of a search context. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so, Gabe, right? Again, the future is TBD. It's nebulous. We're going to see how this plays out. But, look, I've got data. I understand the consumer or the buyer, and I want that buyer to understand my product or services. How do I do that when it's an AI or LLM starting to make some of the synthesis around a response or actually make a decision about which action to take? How do I make sure that my data, my service is understood by that model to help steer and influence the decision that's ultimately made or the result that's put in front of the consumer?
Would another way to say that be that, current context or the model that we've lived off is, hey, you're going to place an ad, whether it's a search ad, whether it's a display ad, whether it's pre-roll or CTV in a certain context. And now we're going to have to augment that with placing data at the point of reasoning.
Yeah. And or making sure that that data influences the actual content that the consumer sees and engages with, right? So that is my ad personalized? Was I segmented and targeted using AI? That all looks a little more like traditional advertising. And then occasionally, look, I want the agent to make a decision and maybe subscribe or buy a service product on my behalf. How does my tastes and likes be influenced by the data that the marketer advertiser wants to make sure I'm aware of or that my agent is aware of?
Yep. Yep. So using data more effectively to personalize traditional channels and then using data to influence the kind of agentic dynamic that's going on.
Exactly.
Yeah. Wow. Really exciting, really big stuff. What we've hit on multiple times is data and the data foundation. You said it's critical. I 100% agree. It sounds like, really that's going to be the determinant on whether you win or lose. Like, any advice on how to develop a data strategy that will win in the future?
Yeah. I mean, Gabe, uh, data is absolutely the critical ingredient. And increasingly, we've got to figure out ways as a marketer or advertiser how to get that data to influence that outcome that we just talked about, right? How to influence the AI and make that AI have access to the data and make it usable within the context of the AI's decisioning. So the data itself has to be of sufficient quality and has to be useful to the decision itself, meaning accessible. So it's kind of a garbage in, garbage out problems, right? Brands have to have a strategy to ensure that their data is useful to the point of decision, accessible to the point of decision, and then ultimately, they've got to unify that data in a way that powers it effectively towards the goal that they're trying to achieve. One strategy for doing this and it is really to look to integrated platforms from integrated partners and vendors that can really help them with the aggregation and unification of that data. Because we all know it's been an impediment in advertising and marketing for many, many years now, right? The ability to access the right data and put it into my advertising or marketing platform in a unified and consistent way to power the maybe traditionally through machine learning and increasingly through AI to power the outcome. And so brands have to have a strategy for who are the partners that they work with who can really help them not have to build this from scratch, but ultimately integrate and make use of both their first party data and the broader data that exists out through the larger community of data partnerships, and then make that unified let's call it profile or understanding of the consumer, and put that into an actionable AI-based system, whether it's agent-based or really more traditional based, but influenced by AI.
Absolutely. Yeah. 100% agree. Essentially, have to have the data be clean, have to have access, has to be unified. Sounds like working with partners. There's a lot of technologies, including Demandbase, that work to unify this data for the go to market. Is there any new roles or who's doing this internally? For what did you see at your customers? There's somebody within marketing that's owning this. Is it like a CIO type, or
Yeah.
how do you see they're working?
Yeah. I mean, we typically see the marketer and the CMO's office really being the point of origination of the use case, right?
Yeah.
Really want to achieve an outcome. It's again, harking back to their age old marketer outcomes. And oftentimes what they start to encounter is those internal impediments to the use of their data, whether that's engineering and technology, or whether it's actually governance about the data itself. They may start to encounter problems. And one way that we see acceleration of this amongst our customers is by working with the right partner who may have an integrated stack that can really accelerate the time to market to achieve the use case and outcome without having to overcome all the internal build related barriers to get that use case to market. And so working with partners who offer integrated offerings that can help them integrate their first party data, complement and enrich that with third party data that may be accessible in the integrated platform, and really help put that data into the context of the advertising or marketing decision to power the personalization and ultimately measure and optimize the outcomes becomes, I think, the right approach for most marketing organizations.
Got it. So it starts with the outcomes and the use cases that are going to drive it, identifying what the right data sets, and as opposed to kind of trying to build it internally or stitch things together, which becomes really complex. You're working with a partner that has experience and has built modern technology to pull it together and make it accessible for that use case and to drive that outcome.
I think that's the right strategy for most of the marketers that we end up engaging with.
Makes sense. All right. We are, Demandbase and our audience are really focused on B2B. And there's a lot of similarities between B2C and B2B. Obviously, both sides of the house are being impacted by AI in a huge ways. Is there any like impact though that you see as being kind of unique to B2B versus consumer advertising?
I mean, at the end of the day, the goals are the same, right? I want to influence a buyer to engage with my products or my services and or satisfy and upsell them, right? And so, how we sort of treat data, the granularity of that data may vary rather than being strictly one-to-one consumer based and powering a one-to-one personalization. Perhaps what I'm doing with B2B is grouping and cohorting some of that data and then starting to target through that segmentation, a larger cohort of individuals. But my goal is the same, right? And so the differentiation that I really think about, Gabe, and you could probably educate me much more than I could educate you on this topic, is really that much of the underpinning, the foundations of need are very, very similar. The granularity at which we'll do that targeting segmentation may be different. The outcomes we're trying to produce are in fact very, very similar as well. Right. So for me, the differentiation here starts to be about the granularity of the data, more so than a difference of outcome that we're trying to produce. I hope that
That
resonates.
re-
Yeah.
yeah, that really does resonate, and just to kind of add some color from on the B2B side, I think and going back to the kind of what's working right now and how the enrichment, personalization, the channels. Something that is really working right now that had been an impediment before is finding the buying group within an account. right? And historically, marketing had been focused on leads. Who's the lead that I'm going to give to the sales team so I'm going after a person. And then what happened was, well, isn't it really an account that buys a B2B product? And that's what led to the advent of ABM. And that was a big step forward kind of a decade ago. And I think what we're starting to see is ABM is a great set of tactics to align sales and marketing around data to go after the same accounts and engage them and show a lot of great outcomes. But it's not directly correlated to pipeline, right? And that's what sales is most focused on, is opportunities. Like, what I have different products within my organization. Each one of them can be an opportunity. Who really buys, these products? What is the basis of an opportunity? It's the buying group. And so, to your point about being able to scale segmentation and audiences, I think now the technology exists to say, hey, it's not just the account, is who's the buying group for every product? And can we align sales and marketing around, again, to your point, the granularity of that data, which you might not see or need in B2C, but in B2B becomes incredibly important. So that's one of the, if I was going to say, hey, what are the best in class B2B marketers doing today that they weren't able to? Identification and scaling of the buying group, which I'm seeing making a huge impact on the outcomes, like creation of pipeline, increased bookings, those sort of things.
And it all harks back to the data, Gabe.
100%. I think we were talking, a couple of weeks ago. It's like, if there was one thing that I could wave my magic wand on, is that data strategy would be at the top of everybody's list for 2026. I think it'll be on a lot of lists for sure. So other practical advice. I mean, you've really given a lot of good information about what's working today, how to think about data, work with external partners. If there's somebody, that, hey, they're just kind of understanding, okay, now is my time to activate AI from a marketing perspective. Is there any advice you give them on how to start?
Yeah. I mean, we already hit upon some of it. Make sure that you have a first party data strategy and have some data in house that you can work with. Choose vendors and partners that have an integrated stack that helps you take advantage not only of your data, but other data from the broader community of providers that exist and can be relevant to powering those outcomes. Don't boil the ocean, right? We started with sort of the difficulty of unification of data and the complexity of what that can mean to enrich a profile or understanding of the consumer. And if we look at every use case without prioritization, we often can sort of freeze and lock up in our ability to pursue them. So, prioritize and choose those use cases that ultimately will prove enough value and be achievable from data that you have accessible through the channels that already exist today, and start to take advantage in that way, right? Take little baby steps that develop that organizational muscle, are achievable, and prove the valuable outcomes to your stakeholders.
Kind of go from where you are today. Here's my current success metrics. What can I drive? Prioritize that. Here's my advertising workflow. How can I make that more efficient? And just kind of start working on the low hanging fruit, essentially.
Yeah, pick, and don't pick it all, right? Pick a piece of fruit at a time and prove the value and the taste of it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Now, AWS, we work with AWS very closely. We have our agent base, which is our system of agents that sits on top of our unified data platform, which enables a lot of scale to our marketers. We've built that on AWS. There was a lot of amazing tools that helped us to launch our agents. What are some of the things that you're launching in ad tech that can help a data-driven marketer?
Yeah. I won't cover off our full roadmap for ad tech and for advertising or marketing, but know that we're innovating quite a bit in this space, right? You can really look to public announcements that have been made around our AI related stack, including Bedrock. And we really think, that we offer the best, foundations for choosing the right models, for optimizing for cost and latency efficiency, right? For ultimately securely customizing with your data, the AI itself, for being able to run AI responsibly in an enterprise grade manner here on the AWS cloud. And now increasingly to be able to deploy and operate agents at scale. And that's all part of our larger, AI and machine learning stack here at AWS. I won't go into the details of that. I don't want to bore, our listeners today, Gabe, but do know that we're going to continue to pioneer and make quite a bit of innovations in this area. When it comes to advertising and marketing specifically, and to the likes of yourself at Demandbase, we're really powering, I think, some of the foundational undifferentiated heavy lift around the data that helps both, integrate, ingest, enrich, identify, and collaborate around data in ways that start to allow you to unify foundationally and then power the AI stack here at AWS to be able to drive AI-based insights, AI-based actions, and power those outcomes through next best actioning, next best offering, and personalization. And then when it comes to the sort of final mile of the stack, we work with partners and customers like yourself who really build those applications on behalf of the marketer and advertiser and really bring them to market at scale. And so I really think, and we think at AWS, about democratizing the use of AI and ML through our enterprise grade stack, but we do that to remove the undifferentiated heavy lift. And then we let the AI shine when it marries with data on companies like yourself and from our marketer and advertiser customers who want to take advantage of that to power their outcomes. That's where they start to look to partners. The other role that AWS really plays is around, I'm going to call it that organizational readiness, right? The series of partners that we have with both their integrated stacks, but then also, our transformation and consultancy practice partners who can really help come in and work with marketers and advertisers to get their AI strategy right, to help choose the right partners, and then start to integrate those in ways that can enable the transformation if they can't find a single off-the-shelf provider for them. So, we play a myriad of roles. I won't cover off all of our roadmap, but do know that we play in every one of those layers, from data ultimately to the AI itself, and then a little bit in that final mile of the applications through which customers can. I hope that resonates, Gabe.
Yeah, I mean, I can attest to that value. I say 100% that AWS has been an amazing partner. I'm really proud of the pace of innovation that Demandbase has, and I think it's only increasing. And we've worked with you across those different levels at kind of the heavy lift data side, and then adding our heavy lift AI side, and then adding all the data that we have. We have all B2B data assets. We bring in the first party data in the ways we talked about for a unified data platform, and then having the tools to build the AI on top of that. And we've certainly taken advantage of your transformation services with days up in Seattle that have really been game changing for us. So you guys are a huge partner and add a ton of value in the ecosystem, and it's appreciated.
Now, we love the partnership, Gabe. Thank you.
Yeah, likewise. So we did, the practical advice for kind of the practitioner. If you were going to look from like a business perspective, if we hit back on maybe it's not hype, maybe it's uncertainty or to be determined, future, what would your advice be to CMOs and CROs that are navigating this transformation?
Yeah, I mean, we kind of hit upon some of the difficulty that CMOs can encounter. And what I would say is don't hesitate to get on the bike and try to figure out how to ride it, right? Because you ultimately need to build organizational knowledge and that organizational operational musculature to overcome those challenges. And it's not too late to start, right? It's never too late to start, but get started today, because the sooner you develop that practice, the earlier that you'll be able to achieve those outcomes and benefit from the AI that exists even in the current state. You'll also be ready as the new era, as we see some of that nebulosity start to take greater shape, you'll be ready to engage in those agentic related channels. You'll be able to engage in new formats, all through getting your data strategy and foundations right today, and then developing your practices on top of that. So get going. The winners of tomorrow are actually developing today.
Yeah, there's an urgency, and I know that, I think I see in the market that it can be daunting, but things are being figured out every day, and just getting the muscle, like you say, to be a part of the transformation, even if it changed dramatically, picks up momentum for your organization. So I think that's great advice. Last question. This is a tough one. Thinking 5 years out, which doesn't sound that far in the future, but given the pace of change, it might as well be 50. If we're looking at 2030, what does advertising look like? And what will have changed and what will have stayed the same?
Yeah. The need for data is going to stay the same. That is going to be ubiquitous, right? The age old goals stay the same. The channels and the mix of how we'll achieve them and how we'll employ and use data to produce those outcomes is ultimately going to, transform itself, right? We'll still see the traditional mix of channels like we have with every one of the eras of advertising that we talked about from an evolutionary spectrum. And now we'll start to augment those with brand new approaches to engaging those consumers and influencing their outcome. Across every one of those eras, we've seen the growth of data, the growth of the utilization of that data to power outcomes increase in its potency. And I think this next era is going to produce very similar results, where we'll both decorate what existed and produce better outcomes with the addition of the new channels, right? So increased efficiencies throughout, still relying on data, and then the advent of, additional agent-based type advertising and marketing scenarios at scale, going from what we may have considered to be nebulous and or hype-based today to a reality within 3 to 5 years.
Yeah. So, the theme that's really emerged here, and I feel, for being a CEO of my organization, which I even feel more urgent about after this conversation, is the importance of data. The importance of data, both in the outcomes that you can drive today through making current channels more efficient, and then the importance of data in driving the new channels and the outcomes of the future. So I think that really emerges as the top theme for me. I really like the hitting on outcomes. I think a lot of times we focus on the means to the outcomes, but now with these tools, we can be even more laser focused on outcomes. We can do that through, for instance, driving more engagement, because we can scale personalization so much more than we used to be able to. But it's focusing on the outcomes is really the thing that connects the past to the future. So really energizing discussion. I feel like we could keep talking about this. We should probably do it again in 6 months or a year to see how things have changed and what we're excited about then. I have a feeling we'd still talk about data then, but thank you for joining us today. For listeners that want to get in touch with you, what's the best way?
Reach out to your AWS account manager and really drive a conversation about your use cases for advertising or marketing, including with AI. And they will engage myself and my team to ultimately come on your behalf and guide, advise, help shape some of your strategy or enable your solutioning, including through partners like Demandbase. So reach out through your AM team.
Well, awesome. And we have a great AM team. I'll just give that plug at AWS. So it's great talking with you. I know listeners are going to love this. I was energized by the discussion. I think we're at such an exciting period for advertising and marketing. And it's really a joy to be a partner with you, and let's see where things go.
Gabe, thank you so much for having me today. It indeed was a thrilling conversation. I'll look forward to the next chapter of this.